Hi, my name is Marcus Moates. I founded Nature's Lab Extracts back in 2007, 2008. We started out of a garage in California, back in North Hollywood, California. We started really doing heavy solvent extraction back then. A lot of butane, a little bit of ethanol, mostly butane extraction for live resin though. A lot of OG Kushes back then. So we get asked a lot of the questions about solvent, solventless, solvent-free, like what's the difference? How do you distinguish between those things? So a lot of what we do with solvent, obviously water is considered the universal solvent, so you get a little bit of itch right there in that one, but for the most part, solvent extraction includes ethanol and butane predominantly. You get some people who use heptane, hexane, pentane, some of the other secondary solvents in there, but for the most part, just butane and ethanol lives in that realm. If you're using ethanol, you're pretty much making distillate, which is a isolated molecule. For the most part, it is just THC and a few other molecules that are really close in molecular weight, like THCV and some things like that. People consider that solvent-free, even though it does come from a solvent, because the solvent has been reduced out of it to a zero content level. Typically, at that point, for some reason, people have labeled that solvent-free. Distillate's been kind of taken more of the popular term for that particular process. When people say solvent extracts, they're typically referring to a live resin or a cured resin from butane. Most butane extracts, even though they're purged and they're about 100% free, they still don't get labeled as solvent-free. It's just one of those weird things that like kind of happened back in like the early days. Solventless, on the other hand, is just made with water. You see a couple different variants on that, and you'll see a full melt variation, or you'll see someone press it into rosin. The pressed rosin is just a step away from the full melt. So full melt is just a fully washed extract collected in a micron screen and then put into a freeze dryer typically. Some people still air dry. And then you take that one step further, press it into rosin with a rosin press bag and a little bit of pressure, some heat. Those typically are the two main categories, solventless and solvent. Since then, you start seeing a lot of pen development. Lately has been a big thing in the market. Everybody has a rosin pen, a solvent pen. Live resin's kind of turned into more of a process that people just want to see in pens. Live resin and resin, the difference between the two, live resin would suggest that you're using a frozen material. So it means you cut the plant down directly into the freezer, try to do it within the first 30 minutes or so. It ends up with a much better true plant profile, a lot more light notes in there, but a little bit different spectrum as far as what terpenes that you're going to get. When you do full plant cured, cut, and cured process instead of a frozen process, you end up with a little different terpene profile. The effects are a little different. I feel personally, for my body chemistry anyway, it's got a little bit more punch when it's a cured flower instead of a live flower. But again, just a personal preference. Some people tend to prefer live resin, hands down, no matter what. On the solventless side, live rosin is kind of king. It's definitely the product that everybody's going for these days. If there was something that was on the cusp and on the wave, live rosin is definitely that one. There's some other things that have a pretty good sector jumping right now. I'd say like beverages are always a good one, but again, you're starting to see a lot more solventless go into that. Before, distillate was just everything. You know, you had distillate as an ingredient, distillate as a pen source. It pretty much seemed like it ruled the world. But lately, you've seen solventless really start to step in, which is nice. You start to see people who really want to see something a little more healthy. You know, obviously, anything made with a solvent, you always have that worry of what solvent's left in there versus, you know, if you're using a water extraction, always you have to worry about moisture content. And typically, you can hear that if you're inhaling it because it'll sizzle at you. So all in all, much better process. It's nice to see, you know, as we see new states come on, I'm starting to see a lot more people go into the solventless sector almost immediately. Before, it seemed like distillate was your entry level point for pretty much everybody. Nobody really wanted to dive into changing that up, but luckily with the way that the internet works and the way that social media works, people are a lot more educated. So the entry level user now has a lot more to think about and a lot more education at their fingertips. So a lot easier to see solventless and things like that rising up much quicker. Let's see here. Other products that have been coming out, I mean, even the edible sector, you used to see distillate most of the time as an ingredient going into everything as the building block for THC. Again, now you start to see solventless rule that realm too. Everybody wants rosin gummies instead of seeing the standard distillate gummy. I feel like the taste is a lot better too. Distillate's kind of got a bitter taste to it. A lot of isolation goes into that. Trying to think what other new products that we're really seeing. Shout out to Puffco. Those guys have been making entry level for rosin and solventless a lot easier. A lot more people have had access without having to bust out a blowtorch just to take a dab. So that definitely has helped out with education on that solventless level. I think what else is new coming up. Other than that, it's just been a lot of pheno hunts I've been seeing out of a lot of companies lately just to try to find the best thing for solventless they possibly can. A lot of flavors aren't really conducive to extraction the same way on solventless that they once were on solvent extraction. So it's always good to see some new things coming out there on the genetic side too. How's it going? Just talking about differences between extractions. If you got any questions or anything, like I'm totally open to some questions. Yeah. Oh yeah. So yield wise, if you're doing rosin or like live resin or cured material. Okay. So if you're doing trim runs and you're like processing your trim, it's good to not throw things away. I'm totally about that. Trim run. Cut it like you normally would. I usually let things dry for the most part, like most of the way dry. I end up, if I'm in a small garden, you know, and you're by yourself and you're kind of playing that delicate dance of, all right, it's going to dry up over this next week, so I have to trim it over this next week. You know, I try to make sure if I'm trimming into a bucket, I churn the trim to make sure it doesn't, you know, build up some crazy moisture.
Okay, all right.
But I try to process my trim quickly just so it comes out pretty. If I know I'm not, once I get it all done and ready, I'll make sure the moisture content's pretty low. You know, churn it a couple times, stick my hand in it, feel for it, and then I'll bag it and tag it, throw it in the freezer, just to hold on to it. You know, even though it's not rosin or I mean really anything. It just keeps it from oxidizing. Because if you hold on to your trim longer, even if it's outside in a room, you'll start seeing like conversions. So you'll start seeing THC degrade and turn into like THCA, THCV. CBN, CBG, CBC, like these other things. It's still like you hit them and like it'll still like level you out. There's like CBG and those things kind of like make you sleepy anyway. Yeah, but your terp profile starts to go away. So that's like the like double edge. The longer you wait, so freezing it doesn't stop it, but at least slows it down. And then from that point, if you're washing it for rosin, I'm assuming, or BHO or ethanol.
See, I kind of like I kind of enjoy it all.
Yeah.
So
rosin for rosin trim, if I'm got like free time for days, then yeah, I'm washing rosin trim. You know, for the most part, just because of the time it takes. If I got some really pretty stuff to run into rosin, I'm probably gonna blast that into BHO. Just faster with butane.
All right.
And that process is pretty much the same prep work. You want it to be dried out. You want the moisture content to be pretty low. If you want to get like a hygrometer, you can stab a hygrometer inside the trim and kind of wiggle around a little bit till it gets a little bit of a reading on it. That helps out. I try to make sure it's like maybe 10% or less on the moisture content. So you want it to be pretty dry. If you can have it down to like 5, it's almost too dry.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah. But if it is, not the end of the world. Again, if that's the case, I just keep it for butane or ethanol, something that you know is going to be like probably edible grade. Maybe distillate grade, something like that. But then just wash it fast as you can. If you're doing rosin, get it through the wash machine. I try to keep my water like 28 to 30 degrees if you can. I know it's kind of a pain in the ass if you're in a warm room.
Everything is climate control pretty much.
Yeah, most of the rooms I work in are like 40 degrees, like 30 to 40. Wow. Yeah, we used to have a negative like 10 degree freezer truck that we just left open on the back, so it was probably like it was 0 to like 20 in there for the most part. But man, you could make some really good rosin in there.
Shucks, and what from wash to I guess jar? It's temperature controlled?
Yeah, for the most part. Once you wash it, and then you don't need this. Like I've got plenty of friends we've taught to do this in 60-degree rooms, and they're just fine, making some really white, pretty blonde, the best like rosin they could be making from what they have. So it really isn't. It doesn't matter if your room is 100 degrees or 30 degrees, as long as you can build a koozie of some sort around your vessel, you're pretty good.
Nice.
And you just got to keep adding ice. Kind of sucks, but worse things. You got enough ice in the chest beside you, you're pretty good. BHO, on the other hand, obviously you want to have safe access to that one. If you've got like a C1, D1 booth available, that's your best bet. I mean, back in the day, obviously we were outside with glass tubes. It's a very different world.
Right.
But hey, it got the job done. And I mean, I've processed thousands and thousands of those glass tubes, so
Yes.
it definitely was effective. And great for head stash. I still think that that's the best BHO. Every machine I've seen, it's like, yeah, glass tube still does a better job. Obviously, not really the route that you can go these days in the compliance setting, but
Shucks, I noticed there was like a big decline in like the BHO in like the last 5 to 6 years here in the islands, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's all turned into that, I guess, what did they call
THCA.
No, it's CNC or
CRC.
CRC.
Yeah, it stands for color remediation chromatography.
Darn.
And so all it really is like you're taking the pigments off. And when you take the pigment away from it, because like everything's so close to like molecular weight, like you're taking THC away, you're taking terpenes away, you're taking all the stuff that you don't want to take away out too. So just that kind of just makes it a technology I was never fond of. It also makes everything look the same. I mean, if you want to make your entire product line assimilated, then yeah, CRC for a lot of people, it's like what they want to do. Also, they're not working with quality. If you're working with a bunch of like trim that was not stored right, it's like, oh yeah, you can just remediate the color, off to the races. But yeah, that CRC technology, it just destroyed BHO's reputation, because then all of a sudden it's like you really had to know your operator. Otherwise, you don't know what they're selling you. It could look really pretty and be floor trim, just the bottom of the barrel kind of thing, but it looks like live resin. Yeah, it's interesting. Like CRC just kind of destroyed that, and once that happened, rosin just shot up.
Right.
Everybody wanted to make rosin. Every BHO company became a rosin company.
Oh, wow.
In like LA overnight, pretty much. Yeah, it's interesting.
Is there a difference when running certain flour with rosin and BHO, like yield-wise?
Oh yeah. So a lot of the gassy stuff, like OGs, they do not do well on rosin typically. Like a lot of the stuff that seems to be like papaya, GMO, like those two strains specifically, they pretty much rule the world of rosin. And it's not that they're the best strains in the world, it's because of the yield. So usually when you see a company really trying to push their papaya or really trying to push their garlic cocktail, it's because they're getting like a 6% return on those ones. Versus like an OG Kush. I live in the Valley in Los Angeles, and we are OG Kush people for sure. Problem with rosin and OG Kush is you're seeing like a 1% return, sometimes a sub 1% return. If you see a 3%, you are dancing a jig. I mean, they're rough numbers. But everybody seems to love gassy strains. It's just kind of the narrative changed a little bit when papaya and some of these other ones that had a better yield were the better yielders. Then all of a sudden you start to see a general push of like, well, this is what you should grow because these are great strains. It's like, no, that's just narrative changing because someone's trying to market something to you. I mean, I like GMO a lot too. For as much as it gets pushed out there and it's everywhere on the rosin scene, same with papaya, I still appreciate those strains. Big fan of sour diesel too, and sour diesel is definitely like a rosin specific strain. It does really well on BHO, and so does GMO, and so does papaya. They do great on BHO. You just kind of never see them anymore, just because every rosin guy is going to grab that as fast as they can. Especially if that guy's got OG Kush right beside, because they're like, I don't want that, I want that, So it's definitely changed the whole lineup of what you see cultivated, especially in like a lot of these markets that are really, really heavy in extracts. Definitely seen a giant change in them. I'm just taking questions. I was just kind of running through the differences between solvent, solventless, and solvent-free, but now everybody just calls distillate. So if you have any questions about extraction.
You operate in a number of states.
Yeah, California, Florida, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Nevada.
And what is the future? I mean, Are solvent sales still pushing in those markets, or
For as much decline you see people talking about them online, or you'll see people that are like, oh, you know, rosin's great and BHO is just trash. I would never smoke BHO. You go to the shop level and start talking to stores, BHO still outsells rosin. Every shop pretty much, unless they're a very, very like extraction-centric store that specializes in like what's niche and what's high-end. Those guys you'll typically see pushing more rosin or pushing more like really high-end live resin pens. But for the most part, live resin and distillate always seem like they outsell it.
is that because it's got a better price point and the consumer
Yeah.
is price sensitive?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the ability to change how it looks, you know?
Sure.
With distillate, you can make it look pretty. With live resin, with CRC, in respect of that, you can make it look pretty. With rosin, you're stuck a little different. You can't really cheat that one. I mean, people are finding ways now to try to make their rosin look better. A lot of people have cut their cultivation time down substantially. So instead of running things full term, they're running them at, you know, half term. You know, cut it at day 35, cut it at day 40.
Slowing chlorophyll or something? Or?
Yeah, it just, for the process of what rosin is, it typically can make a strain that may not look pretty typically, like Tangy or Skittles. They typically come out darker. But if you pull them a little earlier, then all of a sudden the trichromes aren't as developed, they aren't as much amber in them, they're a lot more milky, so you have a much prettier, like blonder final product. And so people have started to figure out that one. The flip side of that is, at day 35, your terpenes aren't really developed. Some are, you know, like Skittles and Tangies and these ones that are very, you know, prominent. They're developed, you know, enough to where you can get them whenever you extract them. But most other strains aren't. So you start to hit people's entire product line, and you start noticing that unless it is a Skittles or a Tangy, kind of all tastes the same. And it's just hashy. It's not bad, but it's just hashy. Still clean on your nail, still really pretty and aesthetic there.
They're buying with their eyes as opposed to taste.
Yeah, and it's hype. So like the brands that are doing it typically are the ones who have figured out like, okay, if I want to make everything look pretty to keep up with the standards that my customers have visually, this is the way that I'm going to do it. And, you know, we do a lot of consulting for a lot of cultivators, and so we end up, you know, hearing it through the grapevine, you know, this is what this guy wants, this is what this guy wants, and you start hearing these low times, and you're just like, man, that sounds miserable. Because I get there's a double-edged sword to that. It's like, all right, cool, you're getting twice as many yields, you know, or pulls per year, but then your percentage is probably at half that. So if you had a 4%er, you probably have a 2%er now. Now you've bought double your media to grow into, and you've paid your trimmers twice as many times. So for the business-wise, it's like a terrible idea.
They're just going for that because that's the
aesthetics.
Sells.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those guys are trying to play that long-term game of like, well, if I have a really pretty product, you know, my brand stays very popular, then when, you know, the time comes to be bought out, maybe I'll get bought out. For me, I'm just like, our customers would tear us apart if everything tastes the same. People will notice. So I don't mind like my entire product line having like a different hue to it, you know. If that's really the only goal of like the color remediation is just to have a consistent like look to it. Plus, it's like I've you know, as a pothead, I've had jars and forgotten to, you know, not take labels off and been like, what is this? What is this? So if everything looks the same, I'd be lost anyway. You know, just high enough to not be able to smell it or something. Think I'm hitting one thing, hit another.
I was just talking to Dread Pirate about bottles of wine, right? You can't see that color necessarily.
No.
You're not buying with your eyes for wine. You're buying on taste and smell and
Yeah.
you know, that whole process. But the consumer is going for blue diamonds and fucking.
Yeah. Or, ooh, that's a pretty picture.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like that label a lot. Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of really nice boxes and gone to a lot of meetings where that's the push. You know, it's like I'm there for process and extraction. And the meeting kind of takes that turn of like, well, look at this box. The aesthetics on it are so nice. You know, the way that it feels, it's like an iPhone box. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Back to the product going inside of it, you know, is that good? Or are we just making something that looks good on a shell? And then once you open it up, it's like, oh, well, this doesn't smell good. It does not taste good. And I will never buy this brand again.
And I'm sorry if I'm asking too many questions.
No, you're good. You're good.
What's your take on the whole mold thing? Like, can mold end up in rosin?
Oh, yeah.
And it can be remediated from BHO?
Yeah. Well, for the most part, mold and BHO is very difficult, but I've seen it. I've seen plenty of people who just have high moisture content. They didn't clean their live resin enough, so when they went to extract, they pulled a little bit of water like through the column. Then they end up with a little bit of water in their final product. They didn't degas it enough because water has such a higher boiling point than BHO does. So you end up with a little bit of water in there, and then just time, not selling it, things like that. Rosin, a lot more easy to get mold, especially the guys that don't have freeze dryers. Like if you're not freeze drying everything, then typically air dry is a very delicate dance. A lot of people will use something to absorb, like cardboard. They'll put under the mesh so that way it'll wick down into the cardboard, which works. But then if you do it too long, then you end up with something that kind of smells and tastes like cardboard, which nobody really wants. And so a lot of people that pull a little early, you know, if they pull too early, you'll go to smell it and you'll get that real weird mildewy fungal bacteria kind of smell. And then that's when it's like, all right, well, now I have to dissolve the thing and start over and turn it into a solvent extract because you're probably not going to get that mildewy, moldy smell.
Would we be able to use dehums inside of a AC room?
Yeah, if you're doing air dry, you can definitely do that. And that'll speed up the process a little bit and help you be a little bit more delicate on it too. And that way you don't have to rely on something like that cardboard absorbing. Because if you look at like old books like Hashish by like Robert Clark, that's more or less what they suggest. So I mean, Robert was also writing that book from a perspective of, you know, more just informational, not like a how-to.
Really good book.
Yeah, that's a good one. Hashish.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good one. Cannabis Alchemy is another really good one. And then Marijuana Chemistry. Those are pretty much the three really knowledgeable books.
So I'm wondering how safe that product is compared to just a natural flower. Those
Safe?
products, the extractions, yes.
Well, if you're using water extraction, that's just as safe. The only thing I think that would be unsafe in respect to that would be maybe like your tolerance. Like if your tolerance isn't super high and you're going to try to gauge that thing for the first time and not maybe be real moderate about it, you could probably easily find yourself asleep, but that's about where that would end. And you know real quick. It wouldn't be like, oh, I'm sleepy all of a sudden. You'd be like, yeah, that was a little heavy. Because concentrates, typically, if you're smoking them, they're definitely a little different than what you're used to on the flower side. That being said, butane extracts done right, really clean, they're pretty light. So you can take a pretty decent hit off of that with a low tolerance and not choke up. Solvent extracts are a lot closer to flower, so they have a lot more plant matter in them still to some varying degree. So if you take a giant hit off of a solventless extract, like a rosin or a full melt, it'll grab you by the throat for sure. But it's just one of those things it's just like edibles, you know, you don't want to start off with the whole edible, you want to take a little bit, give it a little time, same kind of concept, ease into it, and it's safe. Solvent extracts can be unsafe, but typically in every market where you've got regulation behind it, it's rigorous enough that they have to go through testing and everything like that to where it's safe. Rarely do you see anything on like a compliant market on the solvent side that's just unsafe. Now on the unregulated side, different story. It can be good, it cannot be good. A lot of it's going to be based on noises it makes. Solvent tends to, when you open the jar, if there is solvent still present into it, typically it'll hiss at you when you open the jar. You'll hear it, you know, or the lid will just outright pop, you know. If it's a mason jar, you'll see it like depressed, you know. Solvent extracts are kind of, they tell you if they're not done right. And you'll be able to taste it real quick. They usually catch on fire very easy. Not in a dangerous way, but you'll notice that they are more reactive when you do go to hit them. And it's usually a telltale sign too. But for the most part, concentrates just as safe as flower. Actually, usually they go through a little bit more testing, so sometimes a little safer in the sense of data that you have back to you as far as like what you can read on the COAs. No problem. Oh yeah, extracts, worlds of information, a lot of fun stuff in there.
What's the future for Nature's Lab Extract? You guys are in California, Nevada.
We're working on Amsterdam right now. We're working on Spain, and then we've got talks about doing some stuff in Australia.
Hands-on extraction in those markets?
Yeah. I trained teams, like my original team of 10 people, like they've pretty much gotten spread out. Like one of them lives in Nevada. One of the guys I trained in Oklahoma took over our Florida facility as far as like boots on the ground. We've got a guy who's moving to New York to head that project. And then me and a couple other guys bounce around on the West Coast. I run Florida spot, but like from a distance. My buddy from Oklahoma is, like I said, boots on the ground out there. And then Amsterdam, we've got a couple people lined up that I've just been friends with over the years. But I try to keep it for the most part like someone that I've known. You know, that thing they tell you to never do in business. Can't, you know, work with your friends. My leads are all my friends, you know. It's like the only people you can trust and give grief to, you know, a little bit, and them not, you know, get torn up by it. So I've always been lucky to work with good people though, and people that I've known, and it's typically worked out. Never hurts.
And yeah, can we just keep throwing questions?
Yeah, you can keep throwing questions.
This is great.
I was talking to myself before anyone got here, so this is a lot better.
Cool. Was there a presentation, or what did we miss?
No, I was just doing the differences. Like I just kind of gave a little spiel about the difference between solventless and solvent, you know, and then before that, just mentioned my brand, like where we came from, which I can kind of just give you a little snippet of that. We started in 2007. I moved to California from Arizona after college. Started the brand in my garage in North Hollywood, and a buddy of mine, I'm from Arkansas originally, so the idea of entering contests of like with your face is like, no, that's a big no. You know, I'm not trying to go to jail. But one of my buddies, after giving me a couple nudges, convinced me to enter a couple of contests. We did really well at first, and just kind of snowballed from there. My background is mechanical engineering. I kind of thought at some point I was going to hit a big brick wall and be back at Boeing, and just cannabis kind of kept going and kept moving forward, and all of a sudden it's like, this is actually a real job. I can actually tell my parents about this. This is pretty cool. And so then it was just, all right, I guess I'm just doing weed now. And it became full-time, and loved it every minute of it, you know. It's definitely been a lot better than sitting there building planes. Would not want to do that if going back.
And what's the business? I mean, like multi-state operators having brand awareness across state lines helps because you stand a better chance of becoming a Coca-Cola or a Jack Daniels. Is that?
I think more or less I hired enough people to where we kind of streamlined our business in Cali, and the way that Cali market was, it's not really an easy one to be profitable in. A lot of people kill themselves with overhead, and I think our goal is more, if we spread out and just do a couple operations and keep the same staff, we'll be able to keep the same staff. And everybody can have a job, and we can all, you know, live normal lives. Other than that, it's like you're pretty much stuck on the trap side, you know. If everybody wanted to have a normal 9 to 5 and be able to, you know, pay taxes and get a house, it seemed like the only way to do that was for us to, like I said, spread around. So that's why the team kind of all spread around. There's about 4 of us that are original guys that are still in California, operating the California licenses. But for the most part, that was the only way to make it make sense for everybody. So it was brand awareness and trying to build the brand out in the sense of like, hey, you know, when it does get big, you know, we'd love to be one of those brands that becomes a nationwide, in every store brand. But I don't think that was the original goal. It was more just to make sure everybody had a job in the crazy market. And we just got lucky that like we got into Florida. That was a great one, because that's a hard one to get into. There's only like 13, I think maybe 14 licenses right now out there.
They're expensive.
Yeah, and we run Cookies license out there, so we got lucky on that one too. So every cookie store you go to in Florida, like we're the extracts that are on the shelf. I mean, we make cookie strains too that are cookies extracts, but cookies and us.
Did they finance those licenses? Like, are you guys financing all of your licensing and stuff yourself?
TRP is the brand that runs the Cookies Florida license, so they're the ones that built out that entire facility. I work with them in a couple other states too. Chicago, they just opened up one there, I think like 2 days ago too. We're trying to figure out something out here. It's just Hawaii's definitely got a very strict set of laws. I think there's only 3 licenses on each island or something like that.
Yeah, I think there is some beauty in extraction happening.
Yeah, I looked. You guys had some solventless extractions too. I think I saw some rosin on a couple menus, at least on the edible side.
Do you back to solventless versus solvent, do you see the scalability of solvent is far greater than solventless?
You can scale solventless pretty easy.
Oh, you can?
I mean, the only thing that kind of sucks about it is you do have a lot of water needs. So if you're not recirculating your water, you're going to use a lot of water to scale it. A couple of my friends, like Ashley, she owns a company called Ice Extracts. They make the Icon 200, an Icon 120, a 70, and like a 34. The number is just how many gallons of water it is. So that 200 can run like 50, 60,000 grams at once, you know, so you can really crush through some material pretty quick with that thing. But, you know, you're also using 200 gallons of water every time. So, you know, you either got to recycle, refilter, you know, depending on like what the local municipality is going to tell you to do for water control. It just kind of changes the whole dynamic. So a lot of people do think butane's better just because they're just going to buy the solvent. Then you're going to run into this other side of that. Like I worked in Greenfield, and Greenfield had environmental credits. So you can only off-gas so much butane per day. So if you're running a certain recipe where you're pouring off pretty heavy and you're not off-gassing it, but you're pouring it off, they still call that off-gassing. So it still takes up your environmental credits. And once you get to, you know, 100 pounds a day, you're done. So if you pour off, you're losing, you know, 5 or 6 pounds every time, but you're doing 20, 30 pour offs, all of a sudden they're like, well, you can't run all day now. You know, like you've literally capped your day. But you can buy more environmental credits. You know, there's always some crazy loophole.
Where is that?
That was Greenfield, California.
Oh, California.
Yeah, that was when I ran a Loudpack's facility up there.
Got it.
They got bought out by Harborside years ago.
Gotcha. And can you flare that butane? Can you burn that off?
Yeah, well, when you do heavy pour-offs, usually you're making diamonds or something like that. So you're trying to leave some solvent in there to kind of help the crash process speed up a little bit. So, you know, that particular process, you're typically always pouring off a little extra. Just makes life a little easier too when you're trying to transfer it. It's not as thick, so it actually wants to come out of the pan all the way. So also to your benefit there on time.
I just know, like, when I say flare, like, I think that's the term in petroleum for burning excess gas. So they flare it. That's what those towers are.
Yeah. Typically, we're putting them into a vacuum oven, and it's just a degassing oven, so it just pulls it all out that way. So instead of flaring it, it just pulls it out that way through a vapor process and a vapor pump. And sometimes people put gold traps on there to grab what they can out. Most people just throw it right in their vacuum pump and change the oil a couple times a month. But same process.
Do you see Solventless taking over, or
slowly?
Yeah.
One of the things that I was ranting about before everybody came in was you're starting to see a lot more ingredients switching. Before distillate was just an ingredient. After it was a vape pen, you know, and nobody really wanted a distillate pen anymore. All of a sudden, everybody was like, well, I'll just, you know, I'll throw distillate into my edibles, you know. And then everybody got tired of that, and then all of a sudden, everybody had live resin, you know, everywhere because of CRC just kind of backed up the sales of it. So then everybody was like, well, why did I put distillate in there? I got all this live resin, I'll just use that. And then now you're starting to see people slowly like eke into solventless. And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, social media and, you know, people's access to information obviously is a lot better than what it was when, you know, when we'd open up something in Colorado and everybody just had the format of, all right, you're opening up a new state, you have to give them distillate, then you give them live resin, then you give them rosin, and that's how you do it. Like when we opened up the Florida lab, I opened up with just rosin. Skip distillate, skip BHO, straight to rosin. And the market loved it, and they, you know, they took note of like, oh, these guys started with solventless. I mean, the guys who are making distillate, again, it still outsells it, so it's like you're going to make more money going that distillate push, but I'm noticing a lot more educated users, the entry-level people, are going towards solventless, which is definitely a different thing from 5 years ago when the entry-level user just went to distillate primarily. A tiny little amount that went to live resin, but no one went to solventless right out of the gate, you know. But now definitely seeing that one.
Yeah, I think 710 labs shut down all their butane.
Yeah, they never really had a huge hold on the butane side. They were predominantly more of a solventless based company anyway. Like Raw Gardens was like one of the big butane guys, and they were just known for like, that's the other thing is 710, you know, high end, you know, Raw Gardens, low end. They were just known for being butane, you know, like butane kind of just lived with all the low end guys for a little while there. We just re-released our live resin line, and we've gotten good review and we've had good feedback from it, but it is weird seeing it like right next to everything else. It's like $20, you know, and even then it's like I think ours is like, you know, 40, I think at stores now, versus before that was like our wholesale cost, and now that's the retail cost on it. So butane has definitely changed a lot. But yeah, I only have a few minutes left, so I appreciate all the questions. This is definitely better than talking to myself, so thank you for coming in. If you have any questions, though, I've got a booth on the back wall, so I'll be here all days.